A group of former Chicago Bears coaches and staffers threw Caleb Williams under the bus in a now controversial new report, and you can't just dismiss it all outright, but you don't need to take everything in it at face value either.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On the show today, we have to address the big controversial story from Tyler Dunne over at Go Long, addressing Caleb Williams' tumultuous rookie season, and some sourcing from a group of anonymous former Chicago Bears employees, players, coaches, scouts, whoever, really throwing Caleb Williams under the bus, and some really critical quotes and stories in there. And I want to talk about what to take from it and what not to take from it, and what to trust and believe and what not to, and how we can consume a story like this without believing every word as fact, but also without completely ignoring it and saying none of it is true. Because almost certainly the truth lies somewhere in the middle, where some things are true and some things are not. And we're never going to know exactly what is and isn't in those categories, but we can think critically about it and then try and apply it to how much, if at all, this might affect the current Bears, or more so what we need to see from the current Bears to alleviate any concerns that might come from this story. Now, it is behind a paywall, so I understand a lot of people haven't been able to read the whole thing, but it was reported by Tyler Dunne, who has a Substack called Go Long, and I've talked to Tyler Dunne before, and he's put together big stories like these. I generally think of him as a hardworking, reliable journalist who legitimately talked to a number of former Bears people. First and foremost, I don't believe any of this is made up by him. I do think there is fair and valid criticism of how he worded and reported and handled the story, but I think first and foremost, it's not smart to just say, oh, this is all made up. People point out, he used to cover the Packers and used to cover the Lions and has written negative stories about Aaron Rodgers before in a similar pattern. And people say, well, he just, it's naive to just dismiss everything outright because of that. But I'm not here to say, oh, then you should accept it all and take it all perfectly at face value either. But I do think this was a actually reported story. But the real issue here is the credibility of the people he talked to, in the sense that, yes, I'm sure he's legitimately well-sourced enough to be able to talk to former coaches and players and scouts and people around the Chicago Bears. It's whether or not we should believe what those people told him that comes into question here. Because ultimately, this is not stories and examples of things that anyone externally can truly independently verify, right? There were, in any number of these situations that are described in the story, there's a handful of people that are in the room, and the only people that can speak to what happened in that room are the people in the room. So when we hear from one or two people involved, we are hearing their side of the story and their example, which isn't necessarily the complete and objective truth here. So quick overview of some of the things that were in this story, if you haven't been keeping up with it. There was discussion of Caleb Williams clashing with his coaches. The lead of the story is a story about Thomas Brown as interim head coach trying to talk to Caleb on the sidelines during the Seahawks game on Thursday Night Football, and Caleb turning away from him and ignoring and walking away and not listening to what his coach, and there being a heated exchange between those two guys. And I believe there was a situation after that game where Caleb had apologized about some of his behavior on the sideline. So there is some truth to some of those types of things. But in their coaches say they had to simplify the snap count for Caleb Williams because he couldn't understand doing one that was a little bit more complicated. It was too complicated for him. So they had to simplify it and dumb down the playbook and rely on the wristband. And when he went to the wristband, he was often slow to read it and struggled to get players in the right place. Again, these are all things alleged in the story, sourced by a bunch of former coaches and whatever, that he apparently wasn't willing to work hard, and that receivers were annoyed that he was telling them how to run their routes, and that reportedly, allegedly, Caleb Williams blew off film sessions. And as the story goes on, there's also some talk about how the Bears went about the pre-draft process with Ryan Poles favoring Caleb Williams in the scouting and not really giving Jaden Daniels or Bo Nix or Drake May, the full chance to win him over. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a moment here. But I think right away, as you hear some of those things, we can use our critical thinking brains here and detect pretty quickly what probably isn't very true. And again, not a shot at Tyler. He's talking to people and getting their stories and hearing it from multiple people and saying, oh, you've got more than one source. It's just a matter of whether those sources are being 100% forthcoming and honest and true versus angry and, resentful and wanting to put the blame on Caleb Williams. I mean, overall, to be clear, Caleb Williams absolutely deserves some amount of blame for what went wrong last year. I mean, how to split that pie up is the million-dollar question here, but no one should be sitting around saying 0% Caleb's fault, 100% coach's fault. I think generally the consensus majority opinion is it's majority coach's fault. Now, what percentage is that? 70-30 coaches, 60-40, 80-20, whatever, but it is majority coach's fault. And when we hear some of those details we just talked about, specifically the not willing to work hard and blowing off film sessions, to me, those sound exaggerated and not backed up by what teammates and coaches have said about Caleb Williams for a long time. We heard from his coaches and teammates at USC in the pre-draft process. We've heard from his teammates throughout the last two seasons that have publicly put their names on it. And also we hear it from Ben Johnson, this current coaching staff, that Caleb Williams is working hard. He's one of the first people in the building, last person out, setting up workouts with teammates, grinding in the film, in the playbook a ton. Like, that has been a characteristic of him before he got to the Bears, throughout the time that he has been with the Chicago Bears. So, like, some of that stuff you can already kind of say, all right, that's probably not accurate. That's perhaps an angry coach or someone who was not happy with how things went last season, putting the blame on him. And don't get me wrong, it's not to say that there couldn't have been moments where they saw Caleb Williams not working as hard as they wanted or not paying as close attention in a film session or two here and there. But I think the way it gets painted is like this is some chronic issue, and that clearly just has never been the case for Caleb Williams. And so then you start to apply a critical eye to some of the other stuff. And again, this is not a way of saying this isn't Caleb Williams' fault. But when you think about him not really responding well to the coaches, well, his OC and head coach got fired. Was this a coaching staff that we should expect him to just take their marching orders blind? I mean, at first, sure, when you first come in, you got to trust these guys. But once you realize, hey, none of this is working, you can kind of understand why maybe he wasn't as responsive to what they were doing. And when we hear about him being, potentially slow with the play calling and sloppy with some of those details, like, isn't that the coaching staff's job to push him and get him as comfortable to give them plays in a playbook that he can operate at a high level? And same thing with the snap count being simplified and trying to tell receivers how to run the routes. Like, yeah, receivers were running routes wrong. We know that was a thing. So, like, Caleb's trying to help there. So, right, all these things, you can start to peel back the layers a little bit and say, maybe this isn't as big of a deal as it sounds, and maybe it's not as true and as damning as the language might sound. Now, there were some real concerns about some of the claims in there about Ryan Poles that are kind of its own set of issues here. But also I think there's some bigger picture thoughts on like how this story shapes what we need to see from the Chicago Bears this season. So we'll kind of move this conversation forward next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by PrizePicks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off. You and I make decisions every day, but on PrizePicks, being right means cashing in. With football back, PrizePicks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and you can turn your takes into real prizes all in less than 60 seconds. So if we look ahead to next week, as far as these player projections, they'll give you max discounts. For next week, Travis Kelce, 0.5 receiving yards. You pick more or less than 0.5 receiving yards. If he gets 1 or more yards, that's an automatic win. One of your 2 of 6 picks already locked in. But you can pick Caleb Williams passing yards or DeAndre Swift rushing yards and so much more. So download the PrizePicks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. PrizePicks. It's good to be right. The Locked On Bears podcast is also brought to you by Upside. Are you still paying full price for gas? Stop leaving money behind. Get real cash back every time you fill up with the free Upside app. Simply download the free Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and start earning cash at the pump today. Use our limited time promo code TOUCHDOWN and get an extra 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. You could make up to $300 a year just from buying the gas you already needed. At first, I thought it was too good to be true, but it's totally legit. Real people are getting paid just to make their daily commutes, and you can too. Plus, you can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Don't let this offer drive by. Download the free Upside app now using our promo code TOUCHDOWN for a limited time 25 cent per gallon bonus. That's promo code TOUCHDOWN. Offers vary by user and location. Go to upside.com for terms and conditions. So this Caleb Williams story also included a lot of background about Ryan Poles and the pre-draft process for how the Bears drafted Caleb Williams. And we had already heard a different set of dirty details behind the scenes from the ESPN Seth Wickersham book story that had come out this past, May, I think, when that story came out. That was more about Caleb maybe not wanting to be a Chicago Bear and wanting to be a Viking and considering getting around the draft process and ultimately deciding he was going to be a Bear and embrace being a Bear. And I remember at that time, there was a lot of panic of like, this is going to be such a big distraction for the team. And it really hasn't since, right? They put that one aside pretty quickly and laid it to rest in a way that didn't make it a big ongoing controversy. And I expect that to also be the case for this story, where it's a really big deal right now because it comes out 3 days before their first game of the season. And that's good timing. And, it's a business and you want to get eyeballs on your story when you have a big story. But once the Bears play football on Monday night, all anyone's going to be talking about is what happens in that game on Monday night. And this will blow over beyond that. Like, all of this is things in the past, and we'll talk about a little bit of like the future looking like aspects of, okay, what could linger and what could be a problem here. But like, much like the Seth Wickersham story, that's all stuff with the previous coaching staff. None of the people who were quoted and referenced in these stories is still around. So in theory, this is pretty much all behind them and we can all move forward. But one of the concerning things here that does have some longer term implications is some of the information about allegedly how Ryan Poles handled the pre-draft process. And I, again, think this is a situation of people who were in the room, that I believe, but are no longer in the room and are not happy about not being in the room. But they, a source, we don't even know who is involved in this, which to me suggests that it's not like even a scout, but, former coaches are in the scouting room with the front office trying to decide which quarterback to take. And so say offensive coordinator Shane Waldron was telling you stories about things happening in the regular season. Offensive coordinator Shane Waldron was probably in those rooms. He was hired at the time in those rooms in the pre-draft process to tell you the stories that he's claiming from those spots, or other assistant coaches on the staff. Even because some of those stories were after Waldron was gone. So, I mean, coaches can be front office sources for this as well, right? But the whole allegations in here is essentially that when the Bears were scouting the quarterbacks, Ryan Poles decided way before the draft, decided really early he wanted Caleb Williams no matter what, and then intentionally showed bad film of the other quarterbacks and good film of Caleb Williams to say, hey, this is why we should take Caleb Williams. Essentially, forcing everyone to agree that Caleb Williams should be the draft pick and not Drake May or Jaden Daniels or Bo Nix or whoever. And I again think that that's not going to be 100% true, because the Bears very clearly could have, with the number 1 overall pick, committed super early to Caleb Williams. They dragged the pre-draft process on for a while, and I just can't imagine Ryan Poles, all for optics, is going to pretend like it's open until April, even if he decided his mind a long time ago. There was no advantage to be gained there other than some of the Justin Fields trade stuff, but they didn't get good value for Justin Fields anyway. None of that really, there was nothing they gained by really holding off on the quarterback decision here. So if he really loved Caleb Williams all this time and, didn't want to give the other quarterbacks a chance, why did he play this big, long pretend game? What? He doesn't care. He's just trying to get the best quarterback. And if he thinks Caleb Williams is the best quarterback, he's just going to say that on the front end as soon as he's sure of that. And I know they wanted to check some boxes and all that stuff, but to suggest that this was all a farce from the very beginning feels disingenuous by the sources within this being quoted there. I also think it's not that controversial that Ryan Poles evaluated these quarterbacks and thought Caleb Williams was the best one. I find it hard to believe that the sources in this draft room could know Caleb Williams tape so well, and Drake May's tape so well, and Jaden Daniels tape so well, to be able to sit there and definitively say Ryan Poles cherry-picked bad plays, as though this coach knew the full entirety of all the plays, and he could tell that, for some reason, that they're missing all the good plays in here, and that these are only the bad plays, as though he knew there were a bunch of other really good plays, and that this source, this person, was the quarterback expert genius who knows, with all this hindsight, that Ryan Poles actually, got X, Y, or Z wrong. At the end of the day, everybody wanted Caleb Williams. I mean, that he was the consensus number 1 quarterback. Not universal, but consensus number 1 quarterback in this draft. It's not as though Ryan Poles, quote unquote, got it wrong or made this way out there, wild, unprofessional, crazy decision to draft the quarterback everybody wanted. We said that at the time when the Bears drafted him. One of the big reliefs about drafting Caleb Williams was, even if the Bears were wrong, we knew that everybody else was wrong too, because everybody wanted Caleb Williams. Jaden Daniels or Drake May or Bo Nix were always going to be second, third choices there for everybody. There's no hindsight to say, Poles should have known at the time, because he was on board with the unanimous decision here. And ultimately, I get and am attuned to the idea of hey, should we be concerned that he's not using a very objective process to scout players? And sure, the answer is maybe there. But I also think when I think of Ryan Poles and the issues we've seen with his drafts, it has not been with first and second round picks. He nailed Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker in his first year. Darnell Wright has looked really solid. Maybe not, elite just yet, but it's really early, right? But Darnell Wright's looked like a good pick. Dexter is coming into his own as a decent pick. We'll see about Tyreek Stevenson. I'm not saying he's batting 100% here, but Caleb and Roma Dunze looking good. Colson Loveland, Luther Burden looking good. He has generally done well on his first few picks. Obviously, the third and fourth round have been a problem, but he's not lucking into some good picks and some bad picks. If it's a bad process, then it would show up as a bad process throughout, and not he seemed to pick a better offensive tackle there than I don't know if you watched week 1, but Broderick Jones of the I'm trying to remember what team. He struggled really badly out there for the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Like this was not and there was rumors that the Bears maybe like Broderick Jones, whatever, in the pre-draft process, but like this is like Ryan Poles picked the better tackle there than some of the other tackles picked after Darnell. Like you can go through each example. Like these have been decent first round picks, so like I'm not worried that all of a sudden Ryan Poles has some horribly flawed process for picking players. Like I'm not here to say that there's nothing to be concerned about or that these sources and coaches or whatever, I'm sure there are legitimate red flags about Caleb and about Ryan Poles that they are raising that are obscured by all of the emotion and pettiness in there. Like, yes, absolutely. Ryan Poles has done some things wrong. Caleb Williams done some things wrong, for sure. But they're buried under so much emotion and drama and pettiness that really detracts a lot from their points and takes away some of the real hard-hitting aspect of the story. Now, that being said, I still think there's some things we should keep an eye on as things progress forward. And what this really says about, Ben Johnson, the current Bears coaching staff, we'll take a look at whatever implications there might be here next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Gametime. The NFL season is back, and there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle. Between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout, it's frustrating. And that's why I use Gametime. I've got the app on my phone, which it really gives the advantage back to fans. Gametime is fast, easy, and backed by the Gametime guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all the fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. You just pull up the Gametime app, and in a couple of taps, you get amazing deals and seeing your favorite NFL games at prices you won't find anywhere else. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. Ultimately, the concerns that this story raises are exactly why Ben Johnson was hired and exactly what the Chicago Bears are looking for differently from Ben Johnson. And I think it says a lot that one of the big themes of problems from last year was accountability, because this story ultimately is a story about accountability and a lack of it. Because when you think about it, like Ben Johnson was brought in here to put Caleb Williams in the best position to be successful and push these guys and help the Bears win. And when you think about all of the different criticisms that certainly there's going to be some truth to in this story, so much of it is just a deflection and diversion of blame of things that are the coaching staff's responsibility. I think about when they talk about, relying on the wristband and needing to dumb down the play calling. Like, ultimately, it's the coaching staff's job to provide plays and a system that the quarterback can run at a high level. Like there was no getting away from Caleb Williams being your quarterback. You drafted him number 1 overall. He's the guy you're working with. So as a coaching staff, your job is to say, hey, we got to make the most out of this guy. And if you're then finding that he can't handle the things you're asking him to do, then you're not making the most out of him and you are doing your job poorly. Like, you are the teacher, he is the student. And if the student isn't passing your test, then you're probably not teaching him well enough and he's not ready for those tests. And that's not even to say that Caleb Williams was as horrible as they paint him to be here, but it's that concept, right? Like, if you need the snap count simplified a little bit, well, then the coaching staff is responsible for that. It's the coaching staff job to make sure that everyone can get lined up correctly and execute what they're asking of them correctly. And if they can't do it, you can't just say, well, that's the players' fault. They're bad. The coaching staff, we're geniuses. Like, we get it. We're right. They're wrong. Like, that's not accountability. And that's not the job of being a football coach. Like at the end of the day, this is diverting blame away from themselves and onto the players. And it's such a stark contrast to what Ben Johnson is here for and here to do. And ultimately, I think the thing that I get the most hung up on here, that is the most sort of refutes this the most for me, is that this story, and specifically these former coaches, paint this picture of Caleb Williams being this diva who doesn't know what he's doing, who can't get anything right, and is making these mistakes all the time, and however you want to paint this picture. And in spite of all of that, for how allegedly bad and horrible and, unworkable Caleb Williams was, he threw for 3,500 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. That's not to say that was some, elite NFL season, but he was 17th in passing yards. Caleb Williams had more passing yards and a better touchdown to interception ratio than Jalen Hurts, than Kirk Cousins, than Tua Tagovailoa, than Russell Wilson, than Bryce Young, more passing yards than Jordan Love. And I'm not here to say Caleb Williams had some elite season, but if he's this horrible quarterback that you just can't work with, and he put up those kind of numbers, can you imagine what he is capable of? Like that tells you he must be immensely, immensely talented. Like they're describing him like he's Jamarcus Russell or Ryan Leaf. And those guys never put up 3,500 yards and 20 touchdowns, right? Like, and that's not even an elite season. But if you're this abomination of a quarterback and you're still that good with all this other negative stuff around you or whatever, with all this bad stuff he's doing, imagine then what he's capable of with real coaching, with a system that has players lined up correctly and a snap count he can handle correctly and play calling that he can get out and receivers where they're supposed to be. I mean, all those things, right? Like, to me, this would be a lot more compelling if he were actually a lot worse last season. If he had thrown 20 interceptions and 6 touchdowns, all of a sudden you can see where a lot more of the blame belongs on him because, wow, he's just really bad at this. But like the fact that he was able to salvage all of this for that, despite a bunch of coaches that really clearly don't handle the coaching job very well based on their willingness to talk this way, then he should be in a great position with a real coaching staff that holds themselves and the players accountable and is really pushing all of these things in the opposite direction than what was alleged by these coaches. When Ben Johnson is putting a lot on his plate and holding these guys accountable and making them redo stuff when they do it wrong. Like whatever they claim Caleb Williams was doing to ignore Thomas Brown or Shane Waldron or whoever, that's not happening with Ben Johnson. Whatever fundamentals they claim were sloppy in terms of, getting guys in the huddle and all that stuff, that's not happening with Ben Johnson. They're holding them to it. Like that's the plan. Whatever work ethic or film session concerns they have, that's not happening with Ben Johnson. Like none of that stuff that they're alleging is happening this year. So even if it was happening last year and he was still that good, and now that stuff's not happening now, how great then is he going to be? And that's ultimately, that's where the truth is kind of somewhere in the middle. Because Caleb Williams is not going to have a 5,000 yard season. Like he's not going to take some massive, humongous jump up, but he'll still be really good. And that, okay, maybe some of those criticisms had some truth to them, but probably not most of them. Probably not to the full extent that most of them were. And we know that Ben Johnson's going to help him, overcome whatever things might be there. And I've intentionally gone this entire episode today without addressing the biggest controversy in this story was that these sources, former coaches, alleged a learning disability from Caleb Williams. And that to me was probably the most egregious, reckless, and certainly controversial part of this story, that it boggles the mind a little bit, like how these sources feel comfortable just throwing that out there when 31 other teams did a bunch of homework on Caleb Williams and scouts all over have done nothing but deep dives on Caleb Williams, and no one else had that. No other team had concerns about that. Like none of that ever comes anywhere. But the Bears knows he had some. I mean, and even if he did have some kind of learning disability, like a bunch of players have learning disabilities. Like that's not the difference between being successful and not being successful. So it's like it's not even really worth spending a lot of time or energy addressing, because like that was the most ridiculous kind of nonsense part of this. And again, I don't really blame Tyler Dunne for that, because all he can do is talk to as many people as he can and see what stories people can kind of try and match up. And if they share, if the same details are told by multiple people independently, then you hope that that's some level of verification. But when you got multiple people with an axe to grind and multiple people with Caleb Williams fatigue and not loving what happened with the Bears last season, you could bet they could corroborate each other's stories kind of falsely. That if offensive coordinator and offensive line coach both know that this journalist wants to talk to them, they could both come up with some stories here and put some out there. I'm just throwing out, we don't know who talked to Tyler Dunne by any means, but I think you can start to piece together some likely culprits from last year's coaching staff, especially the guys that haven't been able to go on and be super successful elsewhere and maybe haven't had as much success previously in their careers. So like I said at the top, this story is not going to linger. It's going to go away 2 weeks from now. 1 week from now, no one is even really going to be talking about it. I think this will not be a story. Maybe the Bears will address it this week. Maybe they won't. I'm guessing they probably won't. If they do, it'll be very brief, and then life will move on, and we will move on here in the Locked On Bears podcast, because we've got a Bears game to talk about. This podcast coming out Monday morning, Monday Night Football, and then we'll break down Bears Vikings for you Tuesday morning, same time, same place on Locked On Bears. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Be sure to check out Locked On NFL if you're looking for a second listen today, or one of our other Locked On Podcast Networks to keep the conversation rolling. Just coming back tomorrow. Make Locked On Bears your first listen once again for another opportunity to bear down.